Today's webinar is focused on microdosing, specifically advanced strategies for practitioners. I'll spend a few minutes covering some of the fundamental basics, but the assumption is in coming and attending this webinar, you're familiar with the basics already. If you want to become more familiar with the basics and the fundamentals, you could also enroll in our course or buy the book that I have on Amazon called Mastering Microdosing. So I want to spend most of time today going really deep into some more advanced strategies and specifics. And the intention is to provide something of benefit. And so you leave the call today at least learning a new thing or two or three. We also have a special guest for today's webinar. So Nasreen El-Mariesh. Nasreen is one of our graduates of our practitioner training program. She is also a faculty and core facilitator. Nasreen and I were just together in Costa Rica for one of our intensives, which I'm happy to share more about. And towards the end of today's webinar, I will share a little bit about our practitioner certification program. We have another enrollment cycle that is coming up that we will close the first week of November. And we have availability in this next cohort. And as part of that practitioner certification program, we host an intensive at a place called Reunion in Costa Rica, which is the most stunning plant medicine center in the world. I just want to make sure that you all have that context, and I'll share a little bit more towards the end of today's call about if you're interested in participating and joining us as part of that next cohort, how you can get involved. All right, without further ado, let's kick off. So mastering microdosing, advanced strategies for practitioners. Like I said, we are going to be talking about more advanced things today. This is specifically for practitioners or those who want to become practitioners. I recognize there are many of you that are not in that case. You'll still learn a lot by just attending today. I can promise you that. Who am I? Most of you may know who I am. If not, my name is Paul F. Austin. I'm the founder of Third Wave and the Psychedelic Coaching Institute. I'm the author of Mastering Microdosing, How to Use Subperceptual Psychedelics to Heal Trauma, Improve Performance, and Transform Your Life. And my work has been featured in Rolling Stone, the New York Times, WebMD, BBC, Forbes, a lot of places for raising awareness around the benefits of microdosing psychedelics. Naz will be our guest. I'll bring her on in about 10 or 15 minutes. She's lurking in the background somewhere in the jungle of Costa Rica, decompressing after our epic intensive this last week. And Naz is a coach certified by the Psychedelic Coaching Institute, specializing in women's empowerment and relationships. Her approach combines science, somatics, and spirituality to provide an expansive and intuitive coaching experience. And Naz particularly works quite a bit with microdosing in her practice, which is why I brought her in, so she could talk about what she has learned as she supported dozens and dozens of clients through various microdosing protocols. So the Psychedelic Coaching Institute, we train industry-leading coaches and practitioners to master the skill of psychedelics for individual growth and collective transformation. Now, what we're going to cover today are largely going to be these things. There's going to be a few other fun aspects and gifts that get woven in as well. Number one, introduction to microdosing for practitioners, cutting-edge clinical research. What do we know about microdosing from a clinical perspective? Dosing and finding the sweet spot for microdosing. Dispelling myths about microdosing. These are important to address, especially if you're working with clients who may be concerned about microdosing. And then we'll talk through some advanced tools and resources, as well as have time for Q&A. Now, before I get into the cutting edge clinical research, and this is a really fun graph that I'm going to tell you a little bit more about once we get into the clinical research, I want to discuss a little bit about the context around microdosing. Microdosing is a fairly recent phenomenon, and how it came to be is Albert Hofmann in the early 70s was interviewed by High Times, the really famous cannabis magazine. And in that interview, he sort of just offhand mentioned that, maybe very low doses of LSD could be a really useful antidepressant, or could be really useful to help people with focus and ADHD. This interview was published, I believe, in 1970 something. It might have been 72. It could have been 77. I forget the exact date, but in the 1970s. There was a gentleman who found that interview and shared it with James Fadiman. And James Fadiman in 2011 published a book called The Psychedelic Explorer's Guide where he talked about microdosing. He dedicated an entire chapter to microdosing, and it basically provided these anecdotal stories of people who were microdosing 2 times a week for a period of 5 weeks. Jim Fadiman was later on the Tim Ferriss podcast in 2015. Everyone in Silicon Valley listened to the Tim Ferriss podcast, at least at that point in time, and then it started to blow up. Rolling Stone had a piece on it. Wired had a piece on it. And microdosing is really a nascent perspective or modality. There is some ancient and indigenous use that indigenous peoples would consume small amounts of psychedelic substances like mushrooms or ayahuasca to help with energy and vitality, but it wasn't done in the same way that it's being used currently. However, what's really interesting is, and this is really good to know as practitioners, is in the 1960s and 70s, there were actually 2 main forms of therapy with psychedelics. One was called psychedelic assisted therapy. And psychedelic assisted therapy focused on the high dose experience, the mystical experience. You take 3 grams or 4 grams or 5 grams of mushrooms or 250 or 400 or 500 micrograms of LSD. And it's a profound journey where you move deep into the subconscious and the unconscious. You connect with something way beyond the individual egoic self. And it provides a lot of these profound benefits from the catharsis and the release that can often take place. And as many of you know who have gone through a high dose psychedelic experience, it can be profound. It can also be quite jarring and quite difficult. It's very intense overall. And so this was the predominant form of work with psychedelics in the 50s and 60s. Towards the end of the 60s into the 1970s, they started to experiment a little bit more with what is called psycholytic therapy. Psycholytic therapy. And psycholytic therapy is very different than psychedelic assisted therapy. Psychedelic assisted therapy provided preparation and integration support. It was often 1 or 2 very high doses of psychedelics. Whereas psycholytic therapy was more like you go to the therapist once a week, but you take a little bit of mushrooms when you go, or you take a little bit of LSD when you go. And so every time you go to a therapeutic appointment, let's say over the course of a year, you go, 40 weeks out of the year, every time you would go in, you'd take a little bit of a psychedelic, what I might call a sub-intoxicating dose of a psychedelic, meaning you could still walk. You maybe even could still drive because you're not intoxicated. You could still navigate your everyday reality, but there's just a small change, a small shift in overall perception. And that slight shift allows for more access to emotion, allows for deeper self-reflection, allows for a bit more of a smoother unraveling of the self when in a therapeutic container. Now, what was so interesting is the clinical research showed that psychedelic assisted therapy was more or less the same level of efficacy as psycholytic therapy. Now, again, the main difference is psychedelic assisted therapy is 1 very high dose done maybe 1 or 2 times, whereas psycholytic therapy is done once a week in therapy. So the frame around microdosing for practitioners is really that psycholytic lens. And so when we think about client work, when we think about working, whether we're a body worker, whether we're an executive coach, whether we're a clinical therapist, when we're talking about microdosing, or what I would even call low doses of psychedelics, part of the magic that we're looking to work with is if we have a client, how can they weave in these low doses of psychedelics into the container that we've created? So if we meet with them as a coach once every 2 weeks, are they microdosing or taking a low dose of psychedelics for our appointment? Or if, we're a body worker and we see a client once a month, are they taking a low dose of a psychedelic or a medi dose of psychedelic as part of that engagement when they come to see you? I would say that is the number 1 rule and the number 1 best thing that we can do is when we're microdosing or taking these low doses of psychedelics, we do it while we're physically with an individual who we've hired to support us, because that's when we're going to see the greatest effect of the medicine. Okay, so psychedelic assisted therapy versus psycholytic therapy. Now, more recent clinical research is focused on the context around taking 2 or 3 microdoses a week for a period of 4 to 5 to 6 to 7 to 8 weeks. And the most recent clinical study that was published that I also think is the most valuable from a practitioner lens was a phase 2 study that was carried out by Mind Biotherapeutics. It was done in New Zealand. And essentially in this phase 2 trial, they enrolled 80 participants, and it was blinded, meaning the participants didn't necessarily know if they were taking a microdose or not. And they actually sent these participants home with 10 micrograms of LSD, around 10 micrograms of LSD. The reason they did it in New Zealand is because the New Zealand government allowed these individuals to actually take the LSD home with them. They would not allow people to do that here in the United States because there's still so much stigma around these Schedule I substances. Now, what did they find when they did that? Here's what they found. So this is a graph. This graph shows a depression scores on the left side, depression severity. It's the MADRS score. And it shows that at baseline, this was the average score for folks. Some were quite a bit higher, some were quite a bit lower, but this is sort of the median. After 2 weeks of microdosing LSD twice a week, that baseline score dropped. You see at the 2-week mark. At 4 weeks, it dropped even more. And then after the 4 weeks mark, it stayed pretty similar. 6 weeks, 8 weeks, we saw another slight drop, but probably nothing statistically significant. And then the follow-up 1 month, another slight drop. And the follow-up 3 months evened out at a reasonable level. Now, what does this tell us as practitioners? Or even as people who are microdosing? It is essential that the clients that you are working with commit to microdosing at least twice a week for 4 weeks. At least twice a week for 4 weeks to see the results they want to see. We see that after 2 weeks, when they microdose, there's still a pretty substantial impact on their scores of depression. But we see that impact is even greater after 4 weeks. So it's really key that they're doing it. Now, in this clinical trial, they did it twice a week at about 10 micrograms of LSD for 8 weeks in total, which is why this is the measurement. And what they found is that there was a 63% reduction in depression. Okay, a 63% reduction in depression, and 52% of people were no longer depressed. Okay, 52% of people were no longer depressed, which is pretty outstanding. And this generally tracks. So there's been a little bit of clinical research. There's been quite a bit of observational research. The 3 most common benefits that we're noticing from the research are as follows. Okay, the 3 most common benefits are as follows: better mood, more energy, and better sleep. Now, why is that? I have a few hypotheses on the mechanism of action. One is the impact of microdosing on neuroplasticity and neurogenesis. Okay, neuroplasticity and neurogenesis. That when we're consistently microdosing, which is why the consistency part is important. When we're consistently microdosing, we generate more neuroplasticity. The brain becomes more plastic and more adaptable. This naturally leads to a better mood and more energy. There also tends to be a thing when people start to have a better mood, when they have more energy, they exercise more. They take better care of themselves. They're more kind to themselves. And if they're exercising more, they're sleeping better, they're more kind to themselves, they're less stressed out overall, they're naturally going to sleep better as well. So better mood, more energy, better sleep. There has not been research done on microdosing in depression in adolescents. I just saw that question pop in. Now, the big question, of course, is how relevant is the current research? Because in modern research, we're looking at a pretty large sample size, 80 people, and we're taking the average of those 80. We're not necessarily going into each individual story and opening it up and going, okay, well, what happened with this person or what happened with this person? Whereas when we do client work, whether that's therapeutic work, coaching work, or other types of body work, energy work, we're always in a one-to-one container. We're always in a one-to-one container. And so the scientific research of what we know helps us to communicate the potential benefits of microdosing to the clients that we work with. It helps them to understand it. It helps them to have some context before they go into it. But the map is not the territory. And so the territory of how we actually work with clients is, first and foremost, what I say is spend the first 2 weeks calibrating the dose level. Okay, the first 2 weeks should be basically working with a client. You start low, go slow. Right? You might start at 5 mics of LSD, then try 10 mics of LSD, then try 15 mics of LSD. You are looking to experiment with the client to ensure you can find their sweet spot. Okay, you are looking to experiment to see if you can find their sweet spot. And for most clients, the sweet spot is when they don't feel anxious, they don't feel overwhelmed, they notice it. It might be slightly perceptual, but still sub-intoxicating. And it feels comfortable to take on a day-to-day basis. Not every day, 2 or 3 times a week, but it feels comfortable for them to be able to do that. And when I bring Naz up, we're going to talk a little bit more about LSD versus mushrooms, because what we have to do as a client and practitioner when we start to work with microdosing, when we look at the research, when we're exploring all these different things, is we have to discern the signal from the noise. What is the relevant information and context that is useful here for the client that we are working with? And we have some great questions coming in. Like I said, we will get to Q&A shortly. All right, Naz, I'd love to bring you up now. Oh, there she is.
I'm in the jungle. Well, not quite.
Where are you at the moment?
I'm in Nosara, Costa Rica. So I just moved down the coast from where we were at Reunion, getting a bit of downtime, trying.
Great. Well, you want to just start by briefly introducing yourself so folks here have a little bit of context on you, and then we can get into some of the sort of questions about applied use of microdosing.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. It's good to be here. Some great questions in the chat. So as Paul said, my name is Nasreen El-Mariesh, and I'm actually a graduate from Third Wave's Psychedelic Coaching Institute program. I was in the second cohort. And prior to that, I had a coaching business. I coach women primarily around the subject of relationships, but generally women's empowerment, transformation, and I ran a really successful group coaching program. Since being through Paul's program and connecting with the network and working with psychedelics to kind of bolster my own courage and clarify my vision, I now have a company that I started with another graduate called Women Are the Medicine. And our principal belief is that women are medicine for ourselves, we're medicine for each other, and we're medicine for the world. And the way that we kind of help expedite that, that understanding and that knowledge is by working with psychedelics, both through, we have an 8-week microdosing program, a signature program that we run, starting on next Tuesday, actually. And we also offer legal retreats in the Netherlands, but very sort of female focused, women centric, because women have a particular set of conditioning as women's coaches and experts in female psychology. We kind of understand that women might perhaps warrant a different approach when it comes to any kind of container that involves psychedelics or coaching.
Great. So let's talk about microdosing specifically. And I just saw your WhatsApp note. So we have about 15 minutes together, and then you got to jump. Tell us a little bit about how microdosing has come up in your containers, how you weave it in before ceremonies, after high dose ceremonies, without high dose ceremonies necessarily. Just talk to us a little bit about how does microdosing show up in the container? How is it often woven into the client experience?
Yeah, so there are 2 ways that clients can work with me and microdose. One is through just private one-to-ones, kind of everything that you landed upon then, Paul, applies. So perhaps working with someone to create a relationship with the medicine before they then go into a deeper journey. I often find that microdosing is a really gentle way to break down some of the rigid patterns of thinking that people have. But for some clients, perhaps clients who've got ADHD, it's really useful to help them to sort of quiet the mind and go inwards and kind of distill from the noise. So I definitely love it as a preparation for ceremony. It's also fantastic for integration as well. So whilst you have that window of plasticity after a macro journey, you can then weave in a microdosing protocol, which just brings, microdosing brings intentionality to your day if you are microdosing in a way that you want it to be productive. So that's super helpful for the integration period. I think the most interesting way that I work with microdosing is through the group program that we offer, which is an 8-week transformational program. And it's called the art of microdosing, but microdosing in itself, the act of it is quite simple, but there really is an art, because when you're working with enhanced neuroplasticity, you have to be mindful that that is neither negative nor positive, right? It's neutral. So if you're freeing up the mind and you're loosening some of that rigid thinking, what are you then replacing that with? How are you reconditioning and rewiring the mind? And we find that when you combine microdosing with coaching, so with group coaching and with a framework of learning and community, certainly for women who have very rigid patterns of self-sabotage and people-pleasing and procrastination and internal resistance, we find that approach, that is a really wonderful combination to make sure that women not just break the patterns that they're looking to break, and this can apply for men too, but it really allows you to embed those new ways of thinking and feeling and behaving into the brain, wiring it into your nervous system so that you have long-lasting change. So really, we see microdosing as this incredibly powerful ally if you're already a coach, to learn the skill of microdosing and to help take your clients through that adjacent to you coaching them. So microdosing and coaching combined is, for me, is like, why would you not do that, right? Providing it's safe for the person. So it just seems like a no-brainer for us.
Yeah, and often what I will talk about is, as you mentioned, the art or the skill of microdosing is something that it does take some adaptation and some learning, but it's not, I would say it's not a master skill in and of itself, but the art of how a client may work or a coach may work with the enhanced neuroplasticity requires, I would say, more attention to detail in terms of what's the new environment that the individual is stepping into. Because, like you said, neuroplasticity is neutral, and it can be incredibly beneficial and positive if the right guidance and coaching or support is provided. Let's talk about substances then. Which substance do you most commonly work with clients with? And also, like, within that, what are maybe some of the biggest challenges that you notice clients come to you for support with, and how is microdosing helping them navigate that?
Yeah. Okay. So I'll start with the challenges that feels most apt. A lot of the time people come to us and say, I tried microdosing and it didn't work for me, or it made me really emotional and it made me really wobbly, and I felt kind of like I didn't know what to do with that. So there's kind of like perhaps the overdose and the dreaded underdose there. So some calibration required, but also what's important to understand, especially when you're working, let's take psilocybin, for example, which tends to be the substance that we work the most with. It's the most readily available. It's more sustainable. It's generally nice and easy for people to be able to find, whereas LSD can be a bit more challenging. So we often start with psilocybin for people. They choose what substance they want to work with. And we find that psilocybin is really incredible for putting people in touch with their emotions, right? So it can act as a bit of a heart opener. It can also, as a non-specific amplifier, make people feel a little bit anxious. So again, some support is required around that. But what we also tend to find with psilocybin is that it's a really good torch. Like, psilocybin will shine a light on the areas in your life where you have shitty boundaries, or you're not facing an emotion, or you're not facing a feeling. These are really powerful, like little mushroom allies here that kind of telling you this is what needs to be sorted out. So when people feel a bit, they might find that microdosing can create a challenging dynamic internally for themselves. That's where we know there's something really rich that we can coach with. So this is when people are working on a level that is not just to find that sweet spot to enhance their mood, but they're really wanting to make some changes here. And then with LSD, we have clients who perhaps have ADHD. We find it really helpful if they are microdosing with LSD. So we might, if they can access it, steer them towards that substance. It can also be incredibly, I really love microdosing with LSD. It was the first substance I properly started a relationship with. I can find it really courage bolstering. It allows me to be really creative. So depending on what the client's intentions are, we might steer them towards different substances. But generally, if somebody is new to microdosing, we're like, start with psilocybin. It's a great all-rounder, and it's easily found, and there's more range for you to calibrate with. I think it's harder to work with LSD because sometimes you've got paper, sometimes you've got tincture. It can be not as precise, shall we say.
That's good advice. So how do you think about this relationship between microdosing and macrodosing, or low doses and high therapeutic doses? When you think about sort of that balance and that relationship, how do you approach that with client work?
Yeah, you've already mentioned the sort of more psycholytic approach, which is those smaller doses. And I tend to think that microdoses can definitely be in that range. I think microdosing can genuinely help you to till the soil, right? To loosen up rigid ways of thinking. Whereas when you perhaps go in with a macro dose, you're going in with the big guns. So I think you kind of, they work incredibly differently. So if someone is feeling incredibly stuck, or if someone feels really ready for a big journey, like they've created a relationship with mushrooms, they've done some inner work, and they're ready to go deeper, then we might recommend that they have a macro dose, that they take the 2+, 3+ grams of psilocybin. But I think microdosing is hugely underrated because it is micro. And what we have found is the women who have microdosed with us first, their lives have taken radically different trajectories just by shifting a couple of degrees. So you don't need to kind of kick the doors down with a big macrodose in order to have massive radical shifts. I think with microdosing, the onus is very much on you to do some of the work and to cultivate more of that awareness, where perhaps in a macro journey, things might be a little bit more obvious, shall we say.
I'll talk about this a little bit with addressing myths. Maybe we can just explore this now. There has been some research, and there has even been some criticism about microdosing being, quote unquote, just a placebo, right? And part of this is because, I think a large part of it is because when it's very sub-perceptual, meaning you can't feel anything at all, people are so attached to the benefits of psychedelics being, like we've talked about, a macrodose. It has to be these really big shifts, these really big movements. So when you work with clients and maybe this question comes up, is microdosing a placebo? Is microdosing not a placebo? How do you navigate that part of the conversation? And I'll also share mine, but I wanted to hear yours.
Yeah. So my personal experience and the experience of countless clients who've been through the program is it's definitely not a placebo. And I would, like you've just alluded to here, there's a level of self-awareness that is required when you microdose. It is definitely not a magic pill, but it's so much. Intentionality is not, I'm going to bless my microdose and I'm going to make an intention for today, and then you take it and then you get on with your day. That intentionality has to come into every transition, every act of your day. And that's a practice, right? You're not going to be able to do that immediately. So I would say that when people first start microdosing, they don't notice the effects as much. So what we tend to do is we tend to build up our clients with a practice of self-awareness first without the microdose. So they're creating awareness in the day, and then we drop in the microdose. Then they have a baseline from which, like an actual baseline from which to compare. And then as they move through the weeks, they are really bringing into their daily practice this intentionality of being self-aware. And also, you know, we have centering practices, we have pattern disrupt practices. So it's all about coming back to center and rewiring that in. And I think if you microdose in that way with that level of intentionality, it can't not work for you. Right? That's been our experience, is that just fine tuning and having someone guide you through the process is so valuable. It kind of mitigates all the risk of you not getting the results that you want.
Another aspect that was coming up as we were talking about this is lion's mane, which you know of, I'm sure many people have heard of before, is a functional mushroom. Meaning when you take it, it doesn't have any psychoactive properties. And yet clinical research has shown when lion's mane is taken consistent, it enhances or upregulates BDNF, brain-derived neurotropic factors. So I think there also has to be the sense of you don't have to fully feel something for it to be having any sort of effect. I mean, this is true of almost all supplements. You could look at creatine, you could look at, you know, vitamin B, you could look at fish oil, whatever that might be. So I do think partly there is just there's sort of a medicine in it in terms of how it's impacting clients. And I think the other thing is, and I mentioned this earlier in the call, clinical research only has, you know, it takes averages and very large groups of people, whereas in any coaching container or therapeutic container or, you know, energy container, it is a one-to-one experience. And so we can calibrate and personalize then the dose level where it may be slightly perceptual. And this is why I even hesitate with the word microdosing. I think low dosing can be even more beneficial, right? So we can do it and dial it in such a way where if we want to irritate the client a little bit because they need a catharsis, they have a lot of anxiety and energy that they need to get out, maybe we dial it up. If they're looking more for just focus and flow, it could be dialed back. So I think also depending on the intention of the container, what the client is navigating at that point in time, we can choose specific dosages to help support them in on you know, whether it could be over the trajectory of a 3-month container or even on specific individual days that we may be meeting with them and working with them.
Yeah, I love that. There is no one size fits all. And that's why I think time in the saddle, understanding your own and experimenting with various protocols and substances and really getting the message that everybody's going to do this differently. They're going to have different needs and different requirements and respond to the medicine differently. And just having confidence that you can offer your clients a range versus what you may have read in one article. This is where the course, you know, the program that you guys offer is so valuable, is that you really do get that confidence to tailor make it for your clients, even in a group setting, right? We can tailor make it for our clients. They get that level of support. And that's where it's going to mitigate all of the, you know, microdosing getting the bad rap because it's just placebo and it doesn't work. That's
Exactly. All right, Naz, I'm aware that you got to go. This is fun. It's good to see you again. I mean, I just gave you a goodbye hug on Saturday at our intensive.
Good to see you too.
But thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. And thanks to everyone in the chat who said hi. And yeah, you're in good hands with Paul. So see you soon.
Thank you, Naz. Bye. Bye. Okay. So Naz is a great facilitator, a great pod leader, you know, a fantastic graduate. She's doing and has been doing incredible and amazing work ever since she graduated, which has been, you know, over 2.5 years now. And so it was really cool just to have her come on a little bit and talk about what she's done for clients as she's worked with microdosing and as she's worked with psychedelics. So that just about does it. I mean, I'm aware of, we still have 15 minutes left and I do want to get to Q&A, but in terms of what I wanted to cover explicitly for the flow, we talked about the history and context of microdosing, psychedelic assisted therapy versus psycholytic therapy. We discussed modern clinical research, what it can tell us, but also what do we have to fill in as practitioners? What gaps are there to fill in? We talked about substances and protocols briefly. I'll go into that a little bit more in Q&A, but we did talk about substances and protocols. And we talked about some of the myths as well. And the main myth is that, microdosing or low dosing is just a placebo, which is not the case. And the second myth is that it's dangerous, meaning physiologically dangerous. And this comes in back to the protocol of how we work with microdosing, that if you're taking a low dose of a psychedelic, a microdose every single day for the rest of your life, that could potentially cause some physiological issues. We just don't know at this point in time. Microdosing is not to be utilized like an antidepressant. This isn't something that you take every single day. It's something you might do 2 or 3 times a week for 4 to 6 to 8 weeks, and then take a break, take some time off, take 2 weeks off, 3 weeks off, 4 weeks off, assess where you're at, and then decide if you want to get back in the saddle and start to microdose a little bit more. As long as you are weaving in breaks, doing this only 2 or 3 times a week, taking 2 or 3 weeks off here and there, then there's really no health concerns or risks to be worried about. The big one that's been communicated is some sort of heart risk, the 5-HT2B, valvular heart, and what the pharmacologists who have talked about this concern say is that's really only the case if someone is microdosing every single day for a very, very long time. If they are doing it every so often with breaks built in, as we teach with microdosing, there's really nothing to be worried about. So before we get into Q&A, and we also have a free PDF that we will send to all of our folks who stay on live until the end, a free microdosing practitioners PDF that we are going to pass out. I do want to share a little bit about our practitioner training program. I've talked about it a few times. We talked to Naz, who had gone through the practitioner training program. And I just want to discuss a little bit about the particularities of it, the specifics of it, because I do believe it is an incredibly valuable offering. I recognize that there are more than a few of you here who would be a really great fit for it. And this practitioner certification program, we've put about 300 people through our practitioner certification program. We're starting our 8th cohort on November 6th. So that's about 3 weeks away. And it's designed to help you master the skill of psychedelics at the highest level, so you can make a transformational impact in your clients' lives as well as your own. It includes, most importantly, a week-long intensive at Reunion in Costa Rica. The Brave Earth is not correct. I forgot to change that. At Reunion in Costa Rica, February 8 to 15. We have bi-weekly group integration sessions with our pod leaders, as well as a 6-month practicum where we cover the 5 key elements: assessment, preparation, facilitation, integration, and microdosing. Okay, assessment, preparation, facilitation, integration, and microdosing. And then we also have a directory. So we have tens of thousands of people who come to Third Wave every month. We have a directory of practitioners where our graduates then get listed in upon graduation to help you start to build more of a client base when it comes to psychedelic work. In total, it's a 10-month program, and the next cohort starts November 6th. The big thing is the intensive in Costa Rica. No other training program does this like we do. I'd say that's one of the, there's like 2 key points of differentiation for this program, or I would say 3. One is our week-long intensive in Costa Rica. This is world-class. You will not find another intensive or retreat experience like this. 2 is our focus on leadership, performance, and well-being. So what we make very clear is that this is not a program about healing trauma. And there are some of you who are interested in that, and I totally respect that. But if you're interested in not only healing, but transformation, growth, development, and how psychedelics can help us to become our best selves, how they can help the process of self-realization, that is what this program is focused on. And then finally, I'm a teacher and educator that's been working with medicine for over 15 years. Many of our faculty have been working with medicine for 15, 20, 25 years. So the breadth of experience with our faculty is unmatched in both clinical work. We have a lot of clinicians, medical doctors, clinical psychologists, clinical therapists, and a lot of these folks have now moved into leadership, performance, well-being, other transformational work as well. Really, this is ideal for business, executive, or life coaches ready to unlock new opportunities, health and wellness practitioners, including medical doctors, clinical psychologists, and clinical therapists who want to explore a new approach that's not just rooted in pathology and therapy, or high-achieving professionals seeking a dynamic career transformation. All right, so we have lots of questions. So Jaya has a great question regarding protocols. Fadiman has it every 3 days. So you microdose 1 day, you take 2 days off. You microdose 1 day, you take 2 days off. Stamets has 4 days on, 3 days off. How to decide which is the best protocol for each individual. The advice that I would provide there, Jaya, is if your client wants to work with LSD, they should be utilizing the Fadiman protocol. If your client wants to microdose with LSD, 1 day on, 2 day off, no more than twice a week. If they're interested in microdosing with psilocybin mushrooms, maybe specifically the Stamets stack with lion's mane and niacin, 4 days on, 3 days off is ideal. Nancy asks about strains of mushrooms for microdosing. Golden Teachers are the greatest strain to start with. I would say start there. Other ones that I love include Be Positive. That's a nice one. Cambodian is a nice one. Ghost is nice, potent, but also a very good one. Kay Ko asks, any tips on how to market these offerings either standalone or alongside our main offering? Legality and wording. I offer ketamine massage therapy, for example. We talk a lot about this in the training program, Kay, in terms of how do we discern our comfort level for how publicly we communicate our involvement with psychedelics that are still largely illegal. And there's a couple ways to approach it. Some people don't care. Like I myself am very open about it. I've had no problems or issues whatsoever with it. I don't necessarily provide the substance myself or don't promise to publicly provide the substance myself. I'm just more say I'm a coach. I'll help support you through it. I'll help you navigate it. So I would say less is more when talking about this publicly. Less is more when talking about this publicly. And then if you want to make it clear that, hey, I offer microdosing, you could say something like, I'm certified or trained through the Psychedelic Coaching Institute, or I'm certified and trained in another facilitator training program. Just having that certification on your website will make it very clear to the clients that you work with that, oh, this person knows about preparation and integration, or they know about microdosing, right? So these are subtler ways to communicate what it is that you offer. Rachel asks a good question, which is, what is the importance of ruling out contraindications for microdosing and how best to access plant medicine and microdosing for clients that has reliable quality and dosages? So ruling out contraindications, really the only thing that is contraindicated with low doses of psychedelics like LSD and psilocybin is lithium. So if you have a client who is on lithium, they should not be taking psychedelics whatsoever. That is a big, big no-no. Even microdoses. Jim Fadiman has published a resource on his website, which I will do my best to pull up. I believe it's microdosingpsychedelics.org. It gives a list of all of the sort of supplements and medications that are safe to take while microdosing. And I'll post that here. So just review that. If you have a question, that's typically what I refer folks to. In terms of accessing psychedelics, my recommendation would be to download our sourcing guide on Third Wave. We have a sourcing guide that helps to walk you through that. So G asks, which countries are legal to microdose with psilocybin? Colorado, Oregon are the 2 U.S. states. Jamaica, the Netherlands are the 2 main international countries. And then you have places like Costa Rica, Spain, Portugal, Czech Republic that have decriminalized psilocybin. And then you have various cities like Oakland, Seattle, Detroit, Washington, D.C. that have also decriminalized psilocybin. So it's legal in a few countries, but by and large illegal everywhere. Thankfully, though, in the United States, they are not really cracking down on use. So it's becoming more accessible and more available. Even on Third Wave, we sell a mushroom grow kit. So you could easily go to Third Wave and access our mushroom grow kit. So Ani, I answered that question. Are there any restrictions in the use of psilocybin while on psychiatric medicine, antidepressants? Typically, if someone is on an antidepressant, an SSRI, Prozac, Zoloft, Lexapro, they will need to slowly wean off their medication because they'll need a little bit more of a microdose in order to be able to fully access it. Hi, Leanne.
Hi, Paul, and hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I know I love microdosing, and so this was one of the webinars that I was really excited about. I'm always excited about them, but today I was extra excited.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I'm just reading some of the questions. So Maritza has a question about how much is the cost of the 10 months course and the 8-week course for microdosing. So I mentioned the microdosing course at the beginning. I'll drop a link to that. That is more ideal for beginners. If you've never done a structured microdosing protocol and you're interested in a group container to support you in that, then I would highly encourage you to check out our 45-day microdosing experience. That's going to be the best step for folks. If you've gone through your own structured microdosing protocol, you're supporting others as they're working with psychedelics, or you want to support others and be a little bit more advanced, then I would say our 10-month training program is for people who are or want to become more advanced practitioners and working with psychedelics.
One of the things that I love about the program is in the practicum portion of our certification program, there's three main phases. Phase 1 is theory. Phase 2 is experiential. That's the intensive in Costa Rica. Look at the balloons, know to arrive. And then there's the third phase, and this is the practicum. And in the practicum, we go through the 5 key elements of a psychedelic experience, including assessment, preparation, holding space, integration, and microdosing. So microdosing is obviously something that we are huge proponents of. I have Paul's microdosing book right here, Mastering Microdosing. But in our certification program, you'll learn more about microdosing and how to use it with clients. And as you can tell, like Naz uses it in a few different ways. You can use it to begin with to get someone primed in their coaching, ready for a macrodose. And then obviously we recommend it after to extend that critical learning period where you can really work with your clients and help them to forge the new habits and really mine that aha that came through in their macrodose experience and set their new North Star and work towards it.
That's a great way to frame it. That North Star is important. So, and what we talk a lot about in the training program is the importance of walking the walk. So that's why I even had the polls at the beginning of the webinar today to get a sense of how many of you are actively microdosing, how many of you have gone through a structured microdosing protocol, right? And, you know, we cover microdosing in depth in the 10-month training program, right? With our microdosing experience, the 45-day microdosing experience, we definitely go into it. We give you a deeper sense of it, but we go into even more depth in our practitioner focus because it's not as explicitly focused on microdosing. We're more looking at microdosing as something that is part of a larger transformational container that's being created. And that's not just one modality. That will often require multiple modalities that you have to be skillful at navigating.
While you look for more questions, Paul, I can share a little bit of, I'll share more about the program. Obviously, I'm excited about all of this today. So the program is 10 months long. This is a practitioner certification program. So at the end, you will be a psychedelic practitioner. And I talk to a lot of people who have had their lives positively impacted by psychedelics, and they want to step into this work in a professional way. So they come to us for training, for certification. We're kind of the creme de la creme, or the leader in this space. And so the first phase is theory, and it's 3 months long. And in the theory phase, you work through 6 different modules. It's asynchronous learning. So that means it's a combination of each module comes with curriculum, incredible pre-recorded training videos from Paul. We have guest experts, and we also have live integration sessions every 2 weeks for our students to really help them integrate the information they're learning, both on a personal level, but also on an interpersonal level. And for me, the depth, the community, the conversations that happen every time I pop in on those integration sessions, I'm blown away by how expansive they are and how much I learn just from hearing like-minded students and peers share their experience with each other.
What are some other key reasons why people join, or key things that you notice come up when you're talking to folks who are interested in joining?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a lot of times people, again, there's the interest and people understand the potency and the potential. and they want to do it in a safe and responsible, ethical way. And so in our certification program, we talk about safety, we talk about ethics. They're looking for a framework. And Paul, I know you've talked about this so much. There's no exact blueprint, but we do share and train on different frameworks, and then really encourage our students to make it their own. I'd say there's mainly 3 types of people who are drawn to the program. Obviously, there's the outliers, but people who already have an established coaching practice, whether they're business coaches, executive leadership coaches, a life coach, and they're looking to add psychedelics into the tools or into the offerings that they have for clients. And what we train and teach on is the skill of psychedelics. And so the program has a lot of breadth, but it also has a lot of depth. So that's the one group. The other group, health and wellness practitioners. And again, that could be physical trainers, nutritionists, yoga studio owners or yoga instructors, Reiki, Reiki masters. And again, they're looking to incorporate this and add it into their services. The last group of people that I speak a lot to are people who have had a successful corporate or professional career, and they're really called to do something more meaningful. And they know to come to us for the training that they're looking for. Community is another huge piece of the puzzle. The students that we attract into this program, we're a global program. You'll be connected with fellow practitioners, and again, those like-minded souls are from around the world. And we just had an intensive in Costa Rica. And for me, it's always a really fun experience to see the group chat just come alive after, and how supportive and enthusiastic all of the students are.
So it was great to meet many of you today. And thanks to Leanne for hopping on with us.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you. And thank you everyone for joining us. And I look forward to reading your applications and talking to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.